It was in November 1979 that East London in South Africa experienced mild weather. The little seaside town had pleasant spring mornings, the ocean breezes sweeping the smell of salt and kelp high over the beaches beneath the cliffs. One morning, 64-year-old John Parin did just about what he hardly ever did. He got out of his house. John was by all definitions a recluse. He resided in a small house in the outskirts of town on his own. He was not visited, had no social relations, no incentive to go out into the world. Groceries were brought to him. His bills were paid by mail. All of his life was inside his four walls of his home. He also had one cousin, Margaret, who used to call him. Even such minimal communication as telephone conversations was the total of his human communication. His life may be termed as lonely. John called it peaceful. However, on this very morning, things were different. John awoke with an undescribable desire of going outside, of walking to the close-by park, which bordered along the cliffs of the coast. It was not exactly a thought. It was a compulsion, the feeling that he had to be somewhere, that someone was there. John had been taught long since not to ask how this intuition is, and hence he dressed and put on his walking shoes and walked out the door. The park was beautiful in a rough manner. Walking paths were bordered with thick trees, yet patches in the shrubs gave beautiful panorama of the sea, pounding against the rocks hundreds of feet down the shore. It was the type of place that a person looked up to and guarded against. John was wandering slowly along, with no hurry. He inhaled the new air, heard the waves, and his mind wandered. The calmness that he had in his home was spread out here in nature. He asked himself why he did not do this more frequently. When he turned a corner of the trail, he saw someone in front of him. It was a young man in his 20s who was moving in a strange, nervous manner. He would walk in a few strides to the brink of the cliff, pause, pass the other way, and then walk in a diminutive circle and go back to the brink. John walked more slowly with his eyes. Other individuals at the path had taken note. A few of them had congregated some way off and watched without interfering. John approached closer, and the young man became even more evocative. Whenever he came to the brink of the cliff, he would look down at the rocks below and then withdraw. His hands shook. He was in agony, with a crooked face. John knew at a glance what he was seeing. This young man was shaping up courage to spring, to commit suicide on the rocks below. Other spectators were ignorantly murmuring in what they should do. Is it necessary to call the cops? Should they try to talk to him? Suppose he were startled by some mishap and leaped? But to John, it all became crystal clear. This was why he'd come here. That irresistible impulse which had drawn him out of his home, which had caused his arrival at this path just at this very time. It had caused him to arrive at this path, to this young man. John didn't hesitate. When others stood in amazed silence, he went straight up to the young man. On reaching him, John threw his arm around the shoulders of the stranger very tenderly. The young man flinched at the touch and looked at John with wild, blinking eyes filled with tears. John looked at me composedly, benignly. He had 4 words: "I will show you how." Then, before anybody could respond, before anybody could guess what he intended, John Parin went to the cliff edge and leaped. The fall appeared interminable. The body of John fell in the air, rolling on, till it came crashing down among the boulders in a sickening crack, which resounded in the trail. The youth was frozen with his mouth agape in a horror-stricken mouth. The other spectators fainted and screamed. Someone ran to call for help. But the young man simply gazed down at the broken body of John on the rocks. Blood accumulated about the still. Waves were crashing around, and they did not care about the tragedy. And it was something that in that witnessing snapped in the young man, not to death, but to life. The sight of John with his body ruined on those rocks, the definiteness of it, the complete irreversibility of death, made him shudder at the precipice. He didn't want this. Seeing it in another person made him know that he did not want this. The youthful man stepped aside of the precipice and sat down on the ground and cried. But they were tears now of surprise, of horror, but too of relief. He would not jump. He would live. There were emergency services that came and took the body of John. The young man gave the police everything, shaking in voice. John was able to save a stranger with his death and show a person the importance of life through sacrificing himself. The story of the last act of John Parin was published in the local newspaper, and neighbors just barely acquainted with him addressed him as a hero. In her sorrow, his cousin Margaret declared that she had always known John had a kind heart, although he had kept it too secret to make it known to the world. The young man, whose name was never published in the press, was counseled and assisted. He had some guilt in the death of John, yet he gave him the credit of saving his life. Several years later, he would write to people that he had thought of John Parin every day, and that he had devoted his life to ensuring that the sacrifice of John was not in vain. John Parin had 64 years to be out of human touch, out of relations, out of life outside his walls. But he, in his dying moment, had shared with another human being in the greatest way that the human being can share. He had sacrificed his life so that one more person would have a desire to preserve his or her life.